He was a man who had everything a 9-figure net worth a penthouse overlooking Central Park, and the beautiful, much younger woman hanging on his arm. Tonight, Richard Vanderbilt was celebrating another successful acquisition. He'd chosen La Fenice, a restaurant so exclusive it felt like dining in a vault of old money. But as he scanned the room, a ghost from his past appeared. His ex-wife Catherine, the woman he'd discarded for a newer model, was sitting at the best table, and the man she was laughing with. None other than Alexander Sterling, the titan of tech, the one man in the city whose power could eclipse his own. In that instant, Richard's world tilted on its axis. The hunter had just become the prey. The chauffeured Maybach purred to a silent stop before the discreetly marked entrance of La Fenice. The doorman, a stoic figure named Albert, who had guarded this portal to the elite for 2 decades, moved with practiced grace to open the door. Richard Vanderbilt, a name synonymous with ruthless real estate development and old New York money, emerged first. He was a man sculpted by ambition, his suit a bespoke creation from a Savile Row tailor whose name was only whispered among the truly wealthy. At 52, he possessed a leonine confidence, his silver-streaked dark hair and piercing blue eyes projecting an aura of absolute control. He turned and extended a hand to his companion. Amber Dubois, a woman whose beauty was as striking as it was meticulously maintained, took it. She was 26, a former art gallery assistant, who now curated only one collection herself for Richard's viewing pleasure. Her dress, a shimmering sheath of crimson silk, clung to a figure honed by personal trainers and a diet of green juice and champagne. Her laughter, light and tinkling, was another of her carefully cultivated assets. "Oh, Ricky, it's divine," she breathed, her eyes wide as she took in the restaurant's opulent interior. La Fenice was less a public dining space and more a private club for the gods of finance and industry. The walls were palled in dark, lustrous mahogany, adorned with original oil paintings from Dutch masters. Each table was an island of intimacy, bathed in the soft, flattering glow of a crystal chandelier that dripped diamonds of light from the coffered ceiling. The air hummed with the quiet murmur of power, the clinking of heavy silverware on fine china, and the subtle scent of expensive perfume, and even more expensive wine. "Only the best for you, my dear," Richard said, his hand possessively on the small of her back. He navigated the room with the assurance of a man who owned it, which in a metaphorical sense he did. He had brokered the deal that saved this very building from demolition a decade ago, a fact he never tired of recounting. He nodded curtly at a banking magnate here, offered a tight smile to a shipping tycoon there. These were his peers, his rivals, the members of the gilded cage he had so masterfully constructed around himself. The maitre d', a sleek Italian man named Lorenzo, with the discerning eyes of a hawk, approached them with a deferential bow. "Mr. Vanderbilt, a pleasure as always. Your usual table is ready." "Thank you, Lorenzo, and a bottle of the 96 Petrus to start." Richard didn't need to see a wine list. He knew its contents better than he knew the birthdays of his own children. As they were led to a secluded corner booth, upholstered in plush velvet, the color of a midnight sky, Amber's hand tightened on his arm. "Everyone is looking at us," she whispered, a thrill in her voice. "Let them look," Richard replied, a smirk playing on his lips. He enjoyed the envy. It was a currency as valuable as the stocks in his portfolio. He was Richard Vanderbilt, and this was his kingdom. Amber, with her youth and flawless beauty, was merely the latest jewel in his crown, a testament to his enduring virility and power. He thought with a fleeting and dismissive pang of Catherine, his ex-wife, the mother of his two now grown children, Elizabeth and William. Catherine, who had been there before the billions before the Vanderbilt Tower scraped the Manhattan skyline. She had been his partner in the truest sense of the word, her quiet intelligence and unwavering belief in him a crucial scaffold during his early precarious climbs up the ladder of success. But as his empire grew, so did his appetites. Catherine, with her sensible shoes, her love of gardening, and her gentle, unassuming nature, had started to feel inadequate. She was a comfortable armchair in a life that now demanded a throne. Their divorce had been a brutal, drawn-out affair, a masterpiece of legal warfare. He had been generous, of course, in the way a king might toss a coin to a beggar. He had given her the sprawling Connecticut estate, a beautiful prison he no longer wished to inhabit, and a settlement that would ensure she never had to worry about money again. But he had taken her dignity. His affair with a string of younger women, culminating in his very public relationship with Amber, had been a deliberate act of cruelty, a message to the world and to Catherine herself that she was no longer relevant. He had expected her to crumble to retreat into a quiet life of suburban obscurity, a tragic footnote in his glorious biography. And for a time it seemed she had. The first year after the divorce had been marked by silence. His children reported that she was fine, a word so bland it confirmed his assumptions. She was probably tending her roses, her spirit, as pruned and contained as her beloved hydrangeas. The sommelier arrived with the Petrus, presenting the bottle as if it were a holy relic. The ritual of the tasting, the swirl of the deep garnet liquid in the crystal glass, the heady aroma of black truffle and ripe plum brought Richard back to the present. He took a sip, the wine's velvety texture coating his tongue. It was perfect. Everything in his life was perfect. "To us," he said, raising his glass to Amber. "To us?" she echoed, her eyes reflecting the candlelight. She was a perfect companion, beautiful and uncomplicated. She didn't challenge him. She didn't know the man he had been, only the monument he had become. She didn't see the cracks in the marble. He settled back into the plush velvet, the wine warming his veins. He felt invincible, a modern-day emperor in his chosen Colosseum. He was about to regale Amber with the story of his latest corporate conquest, a hostile takeover that had left a rival weeping when his gaze drifted across the room. It was a casual proprietary scan, the glance of a king surveying his subjects. And then he saw her. It was like a glitch in the matrix, a discordant note in a perfectly composed symphony. At the restaurant's most coveted table, the one nestled in a discreet alcove with a panoramic view of the city lights, sat Catherine. But it wasn't the Catherine he remembered. The woman he saw was not the subdued, heartbroken figure he had painted in his mind. This Catherine was radiant. Her mousy brown hair, which she had always worn in a practical shoulder-length cut, was now a cascade of rich honey-blonde waves that framed her face in a soft, glamorous style. She was wearing a dress the color of sapphire, a simple yet elegant silk slip that shimmered under the soft lights, showcasing a figure that was leaner and more defined than he recalled. Her only jewelry was a pair of delicate diamond earrings that caught the light as she laughed. And it was the laugh that truly stunned him. It wasn't the polite, restrained chuckle he was used to. This was a genuine, unrestrained peal of joy, a sound that filled the space around her with warmth and vitality. Her head was tilted back, her eyes sparkling with amusement. She looked vibrant, confident, and utterly, devastatingly beautiful. a beauty he had either forgotten or perhaps had never truly seen. The shock was a physical blow winding him. The Mistress in his hand suddenly felt like lead. His meticulously constructed world for the first time in a very long time felt unstable. It was as if a character from a forgotten chapter of his life had walked onto the wrong stage, wearing the wrong costume and speaking the wrong lines. "Ricky." "What is it?" Amber's voice, usually a soothing balm, was now an irritating buzz in his ear. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "In a way I have," he murmured, his eyes still locked on his ex-wife's table. But it wasn't just Catherine's transformation that held him captive. It was the man she was with. He was a man Richard knew not just by reputation, but by sight. Alexander Sterling, the CEO of Aura, the revolutionary tech firm that was changing the face of artificial intelligence. Sterling was the new money, the Silicon Valley prodigy who had stormed New York and was now a major player in Richard's own world. He was younger than Richard, in his late 40s, with a sharp, intelligent face, an athletic build that spoke of disciplined mornings in the gym, and an air of quiet intensity that many found intimidating. Richard had dismissed him as a geek, a coder who got lucky, but he couldn't deny the man's power. Aura's stock was soaring, and Sterling's influence was spreading like wildfire through the city's financial and social circles. He was the future, a future that Richard, with his old-world real estate empire, was beginning to feel threatened by. And this man, this titan of the new age, was leaning in close to Catherine, his expression one of rapt attention. He wasn't just dining with her, he was captivated by her. He listened as she spoke, his eyes never leaving her face. He laughed at her jokes. He reached across the table and briefly, gently touched her hand. It was a gesture of such easy intimacy that it sent a spear of pure, unadulterated jealousy through Richard's heart. The narrative he had so carefully crafted for himself began to unravel. Catherine, the discarded wife, the relic of his past, was not supposed to be here in the heart of his kingdom, looking like a goddess and dining with a man who represented everything that was a threat to his dominance. She was supposed to be in Connecticut, tending her roses, mourning the loss of him. "Is that Catherine?" Amber asked, her voice laced with a mixture of curiosity and a dawning cat-like suspicion. She had seen photos, of course, but the woman in the pictures was a pale shadow of the creature across the room. "Yes," Richard said, his voice tight. "She looks different." Amber observed her tone carefully, neutral. "Yes?" He repeated the word, a stone in his throat. He watched as Alexander Sterling signaled for the waiter. The two of them were sharing a bottle of wine, but it wasn't a flashy, ostentatious label like his Mistress. It was a more subtle, sophisticated choice, a burgundy that spoke of a connoisseur's palate, not a showman's ego. The entire scene was a masterclass in understated elegance and power, a stark contrast to the conspicuous consumption he was engaged in with Amber. Suddenly, his own booth felt gaudy. Amber's crimson dress seemed too loud, her laughter too shrill. The Mistress, which moments ago had tasted of victory hour, tasted of ash. He felt a desperate, primal urge to reassert his dominance, to walk over to that table and remind Catherine and this sterling pretender just who he was. He wanted to see the light in her eyes, dim, to see that confident smile falter. He wanted to reclaim his power, but he was paralyzed. For the first time in his adult life, Richard Vanderbilt did not know what to do. The ghost at the feast was not just his ex-wife. It was the ghost of a life he had thrown away, a woman he had underestimated, and a future that was suddenly terrifyingly uncertain. The hunter surveying his domain had suddenly realized he was not the only predator in the jungle, and the prey he thought he had left for dead was now dining with a lion. The vast, opulent space of La Fenice suddenly felt claustrophobic, the air thick with unspoken tensions. Richard found himself unable to tear his gaze away from Catherine's table. Every laugh she shared with Alexander Sterling, every shared glance, was a fresh torment. He dissected their body language with the obsessive focus of a general studying enemy movements. The way Alexander leaned in when she spoke, the easy grace with which she refilled his water glass, the comfortable silence that fell between them, it all pointed to a level of intimacy that sent a cold dread seeping into Richard's bones. "Are you even listening to me?" Amber's voice, sharp and edged with impatience, finally broke through his trance. He turned to her, his expression still clouded. "What?" "I was telling you about the charity gala, the one Cassandra is organizing. I need a new gown, something spectacular." Her words were a meaningless drone, the concerns of a world that had ceased to matter in the last 10 minutes. "Fine. Get whatever you want," he said dismissively, his eyes already drifting back across the room. Amber's perfectly sculpted brows furrowed. "Ricky, what is wrong with you? You've been staring over there all night. It's rude. People are noticing." "I don't care what people think." He snapped the words, coming out harsher than he intended. "You always care what people think," she retorted, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "This is about her, isn't it? Your ex-wife." "It has nothing to do with her." He lied, the falsehood feeling clumsy and transparent even to himself. He took a large swallow of the Petrus, hoping the expensive wine could somehow wash away the bitter taste of jealousy. It didn't. The evening, which had started with such promise, devolved into a tense, silent ordeal. Richard picked at his food, a beautifully prepared Dover sole that might as well have been cardboard, while Amber lapsed into a sullen silence, her phone held up as a shield. The atmosphere at their table was glacial, a stark contrast to the warmth and conviviality emanating from the corner alcove. Richard felt a growing irrational anger. How dared she be happy? How dared she move on? Not just to a new life, but to a better one. It was a betrayal of the narrative he had written for her for them. She was supposed to be the tragic figure, the one left behind. Her happiness felt like a personal insult, a judgment on his choices. As if sensing his turmoil, Lorenzo the maitre d' materialized at his elbow. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Vanderbilt?" he asked, his voice a low, discreet murmur. "Everything is fine, Lorenzo," Richard said through gritted teeth. But then a thought, cold and calculating, slipped into his mind. "Lorenzo, who is that gentleman with Mrs. Vanderbilt?" He used her old name deliberately, a petty assertion of his past claim on her. Lorenzo, the soul of discretion, did not bat an eye. "That is Mr. Alexander Sterling, sir, of Aura." "I know who he is," Richard said impatiently. "Are they regulars?" "Mr. Sterling dines with us occasionally. Mrs. The lady has been in with him a few times over the past several months." Several months. The words hit Richard with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a first date. This was a relationship. A real established relationship that had been unfolding right under his nose in the heart of his own city. The carefully constructed walls of his self-assurance began to crumble. The inevitable moment arrived. Catherine and Alexander Sterling had finished their meal. As Sterling settled the bill, Catherine rose from her seat, her movements fluid and graceful. She smoothed down her sapphire dress and turned her gaze for the first time that evening, sweeping across the room. And then her eyes met Richard's. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The ambient noise of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. He saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes, a brief, unguarded moment of recognition. But it was quickly replaced by something else, a cool, unreadable composure. There was no pain, no anger, no lingering affection. There was nothing. It was the calm, polite neutrality one might afford a distant acquaintance. And that, more than any outburst or accusation, was what truly gutted him. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of cool acknowledgement, before turning her attention back to Alexander, who was now standing beside her. He placed a light hand on her back, a gesture both protective and proprietary, and began to guide her towards the exit. Their path would take them directly past Richard's table. The air crackled with anticipation. Richard's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a primal need to say something, to do something, to shatter her composure and force a reaction. Amber, sensing the impending collision, sat bolt upright, her eyes wide, a spectator at a drama she was only just beginning to understand. As they drew level with the booth, Alexander Sterling paused. He turned his head and looked directly at Richard, his expression calm and steady. "Vanderbilt," he said, his voice even and devoid of any discernible emotion. It was a simple acknowledgement, yet it carried the weight of a gauntlet being thrown down. Richard, caught off guard by the direct address, could only manage a curt nod in return. "Sterling." Catherine's gaze followed Alexander's. She looked at Richard, then her eyes flickered for a fraction of a second to Amber, taking in the crimson dress, the youthful face, the whole tableau of his new life. A ghost of a smile, enigmatic and faintly amused, touched her lips. "Richard," she said, her voice as smooth and cool as polished marble. It was the first time she had spoken his name in over 2 years. The sound of it from her lips was both foreign and painfully familiar. Then she turned and walked away, her head held high, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and shattered assumptions in her wake. Alexander Sterling gave Richard one last long look, a look that was both a challenge and a dismissal before following her. Richard sat frozen in his booth, the remnants of his Dover soul congealing on the plate before him. The king was still in his castle, but his walls had been breached. He looked at Amber, but saw only a pale imitation of the woman who had just walked out of his life for a second time. "Well," Amber said, breaking the heavy silence, her voice dripping with a newfound sarcasm. "That was educational." Richard didn't answer. He was watching the door through which Catherine and Alexander had disappeared, a cold, terrifying thought solidifying in his mind. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost a war he hadn't even known he was fighting. And in the world of Richard Vanderbilt, losing was not an option. The shock was now hardening into something far more dangerous, a burning, obsessive need for retribution. The drive back to Richard's penthouse was a study in frigid silence. The opulent interior of the Maybach, usually a cocoon of comfort and luxury, felt like a tomb. Amber stared out the window at the glittering, indifferent city lights, while Richard replayed the scene at the restaurant, over and over in his mind, each viewing adding a fresh layer of humiliation and rage. Catherine's cool composure, Sterling's confident demeanor, the effortless intimacy between them. It was all a personal affront, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to mock him. He stormed into the penthouse, shrugging off his jacket and tossing it onto a ridiculously expensive chaise lounge. The apartment, A sprawling duplex with panoramic views of Central Park was his sanctuary, a monument to his success. But tonight it felt hollow, the vast, empty spaces echoing his own inner emptiness. "I need a drink," he announced, to no one in particular, striding over to the marble-topped bar. He ignored the vintage cognacs and single-malt scotches, instead reaching for a bottle of vodka. He poured a generous measure into a crystal tumbler, forgoing the ceremony of ice or mixer, and downed it in one fiery gulp. Amber watched him from the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. The pouty, petulant woman from the restaurant had been replaced by someone with a harder, more calculating edge. "So are you going to tell me what that was all about?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Or are you just going to drink yourself into a stupor?" "It was nothing," Richard grunted, pouring another drink. "A chance encounter. It means nothing." "It didn't look like nothing, Ricky," she shot back, stepping further into the room. "The way you looked at her. I've never seen you look at me like that." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. "You look at me like I'm a prize. You looked at her like she was the one who got away." "Don't be ridiculous," he scoffed, but the words lacked conviction. Amber's observation was too close to the bone. "And him," she continued, her voice rising. "Alexander Sterling, the one person in this city who doesn't seem to be intimidated by you. She left you, and she's with him. That's what's really eating you, isn't it? It's not about her. It's about your ego. It's about him." Her words were a slap in the face, a brutal, unwelcome truth. He whirled around, his eyes blazing. "You don't know what you're talking about. You know nothing about my life, about my marriage. I know what I see." Amber's voice was now a furious shout. "I see a man who thought he had it all, who thought he could just discard a woman like an old suit, and is now having a full-blown meltdown because she dared to find happiness with someone else. Someone better." The word better was a poisoned dart. "Get out," Richard said, his voice low and dangerous. "What?" "I said, get out," he roared, pointing a trembling finger towards the door. "Go back to your little apartment that I pay for with the clothes I bought you, and leave me alone." Tears of rage and humiliation welled in Amber's eyes. She stared at him for a long moment, her beautiful face a mask of fury. "You know what, Richard? For the first time, I actually feel sorry for her. She escaped. I'm just living in the prison she broke out of." With that, she turned on her heel, snatched her purse from the counter, and stormed out, slamming the door behind her with a resounding crash that seemed to shake the entire penthouse. Left alone in the cavernous room, Richard sank onto a leather sofa, the anger draining out of him, leaving behind a cold, heavy dread. Amber was right. His rage was fueled by a toxic cocktail of wounded pride, jealousy, and most terrifyingly a dawning sense of his own obsolescence. Sterling was the future. He was the past. Catherine's alliance with him felt like a definitive statement on his own relevance. His mind, conditioned for decades to treat every problem as a business challenge, immediately began to strategize. He needed information. He needed leverage. He needed to understand the dynamics of this new reality so he could find a way to disrupt it. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It belonged to a man named Harrison Vance, a private investigator who operated in the gray areas of the law, a specialist in digging up the kind of dirt that could ruin reputations and topple empires. Vance was expensive, discreet, and utterly without scruples. "Vance," a gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "It's Vanderbilt," There was a slight pause. "Richard, it's been a long time. I trust you're not calling to reminisce about old times. I need information, Harrison, on two people. My ex-wife, Catherine Vanderbilt, though she may be using her maiden name, Davies, and a man named Alexander Sterling." "Sterling of Aura." Vance sounded intrigued. "Flying high these days. What do you want to know?" "Everything," Richard said, his voice a low growl. "Their relationship, how they met, how long they've been seeing each other. His financials, his business dealings, any vulnerabilities. And her. I want to know what she's been doing for the past 2 years. Every detail. I want to know who her friends are, where she goes, what she does. I want to know her." He wanted to understand the woman she had become, the woman who had captivated a man like Sterling. He needed to find the chink in her armor, the weakness he could exploit. "That's a deep dive, Richard. It'll be expensive." "I don't care about the cost," Richard said, his gaze fixed on the city skyline. "I want it done, and I want it done quietly. You know me, Richard. Quiet is my middle name." After hanging up, Richard felt a sliver of his old control returning. He was taking action, seizing the initiative. But as he looked out at the sprawling city, a new unsettling thought began to form. Why was Sterling interested in Catherine? A man like him could have any woman he wanted. Models, actresses, socialites. Why choose a divorced woman in her late 40s, a woman Richard himself had deemed unworthy? Was it possible there was more to this than just a simple romance? Was Sterling using her somehow? The thought was both repulsive and strangely comforting. If Catherine was a pawn in a larger game, it would make sense. It would restore the order of his world. But then another, more insidious thought crept in. What if Sterling wasn't using her at all? What if he saw in Catherine the very things Richard had overlooked or disdained: her intelligence, her quiet strength, her integrity? What if in his blind arrogance he had thrown away a diamond, only to see it picked up and polished by a more discerning eye? The thread of his well-ordered life had been pulled, and as Richard sat alone in his gilded cage, he could feel the entire tapestry beginning to unravel. The investigation into Catherine and Sterling wasn't just about gathering information anymore. It was about finding a way to stitch his world back together, even if it meant tearing theirs apart. A week later, a plain manila envelope devoid of any return address arrived at Richard's private office. Inside was a slim USB drive and a single sheet of paper with a typed message: "The first installment, HV." Richard dismissed his secretary. For the day, locked his office door and slid the drive into his laptop. The screen populated with files, surveillance photos, financial reports, and a detailed summary from Harrison Vance. He clicked on the summary. First, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The report began with Catherine. After the divorce, she hadn't crumbled as he'd expected. Instead, she had undergone a quiet, determined metamorphosis. She had sold the Connecticut estate, a move that surprised Richard. He had seen it as her gilded cage, her consolation prize. But she had clearly viewed it as a link to a past she wanted to sever. With a portion of the settlement money, she had established a non-profit foundation dedicated to providing scholarships and mentorship for underprivileged young women in STEM fields. The report detailed how Catherine had personally overseen every aspect of the foundation's creation, from drafting the charter to interviewing the first round of scholarship recipients. She had leveraged her old contacts from her pre-marriage career in university administration and had quickly built a small but respected organization. The photos Vance had included were not of a lonely, heartbroken woman. They showed Catherine in boardrooms at charity events, speaking at a university podium. She looked poised, engaged, and purposeful. The sapphire dress at La Fenice was not an anomaly. It was her new uniform. Then came the part he was truly waiting for: her connection to Alexander Sterling. They hadn't met at a gala or a society party. They had met at a tech conference where Catherine had been a guest speaker, presenting on the importance of diversity in tech innovation. Sterling had been in the audience. According to Vance's sources, he had been so impressed by her speech and the work of her foundation that he had approached her afterwards. Their first date had been a tour of her foundation's office, followed by a quiet dinner. Their relationship, Vance wrote, had developed slowly, organically, over the last 8 months. It was built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared interests. Sterling was a major donor to her foundation, but his involvement was more than just financial. He served as an informal advisor, connecting her with influential figures in the tech world and providing mentorship to her scholarship students. Richard felt a sour taste in his mouth. This wasn't a sordid affair or a cynical power play. It was a partnership. Sterling wasn't just attracted to Catherine's newfound glamour. He was attracted to her mind, her passion, her purpose. The very qualities Richard had come to find so domestic and unexciting. He turned his attention to the files on Sterling. The financials were as expected astronomical. Aura was a juggernaut, its stock price seemingly defying gravity. But Vance had dug deeper past the public filings and into the murkier waters of Sterling's business dealings. And there he had found something interesting. Aura was in the final stages of a secret high-stakes negotiation to acquire a smaller but incredibly innovative robotics firm called Kinetic Dynamics. The deal was worth billions and would solidify Aura's dominance in the AI and robotics space for the next decade. Kinetic Dynamics held key patents that would be revolutionary if integrated with Aura's AI platform. The acquisition was Sterling's passion project, the keystone of his long-term strategy. Richard leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. He knew Kinetic Dynamics. In fact, a subsidiary of Vanderbilt Properties held a significant, though non-controlling, stake in the company. It was a legacy investment, one he hadn't paid much attention to in recent years. But now, it was a weapon. A cold, brilliant idea began to form in his mind. As a major shareholder, he could potentially disrupt the acquisition. He could raise objections, demand a higher price rally. Other shareholders, and tie the deal up in a quagmire of legal and financial complications. He could make Sterling's life a living hell. He could bleed him, distract him, and maybe even kill the deal altogether. It would be a devastating blow to Aura and to Sterling personally. It was the perfect revenge. It wasn't a direct attack on Catherine, which would be messy and might backfire, making him look petty. This was business. It was a move on the corporate battlefield, a world he understood and dominated. It would hit Sterling where he was most vulnerable, his ambition, his legacy. And Catherine, as Sterling's partner, would be caught in the crossfire. Her newfound happiness would be inextricably linked to the fortunes of a man he was about to bring to his knees. The plan was audacious, ruthless, and deeply satisfying. It restored his sense of control, his belief in his own power. He was no longer the passive, humiliated observer in the restaurant. He was Richard Vanderbilt, the puppet master. And he was about to start pulling the strings. He picked up the phone and dialed his head of corporate strategy. "David," he said, his voice hard as steel. I want you to pull everything we have on a company called Kinetic Dynamics. I want a full breakdown of our shareholder rights and a list of every other major investor. We're going to war." The decision made a sense of calm settled over him. But as he looked at the photo of Catherine on his screen, smiling confident, standing at a podium, a flicker of doubt pricked at his conscience. The woman in the photo was a stranger to him, but she was also the mother of his children, the woman who had once shared his dreams. Was he really prepared to destroy her newfound happiness just to soothe his wounded ego? He pushed the thought aside. This was no longer about feelings. It was about power. In his world, there were winners and losers, and Richard Vanderbilt never lost. He closed the laptop, the faces of Catherine and Sterling, temporarily hidden from view. The game was afoot, and he was confident that he had just found his checkmate move. The Sterling revelation wasn't a defeat, it was an opportunity, and he would seize it with both hands. The boardroom at Vanderbilt Properties was Richard's sanctuary of power, his modern-day throne room. It was a space meticulously designed to intimidate. The 20-foot-long table, carved from a single piece of rare Brazilian mahogany, gleamed under a custom-designed constellation of recessed lights. The wall of glass behind his chair didn't just offer a view, it presented the city as his dominion, a sprawling map of his conquests. Before Alexander Sterling was due to arrive, Richard stalked the room like a caged panther, adjusting the position of a water carafe by a millimeter, ensuring the leather-bound blotter in front of his chair was perfectly aligned. He was not just preparing for a meeting, he was setting a stage for an execution. His legal team had assured him his position was solid. The motion to block the sale of Kinetic Dynamics to Aura was a masterpiece of corporate legalese filled with plausible deniability and ostensibly sound financial reasoning. It was a declaration of war disguised as prudent business. In his mind, the scenario was clear. Sterling would arrive angry and blustering. Richard would remain calm, imperious, a stone wall of corporate procedure. He would watch the tech wunderkind, the man who had stolen his past, slowly realize he was out of his depth, entangled in a game whose rules were written by old money and ruthless ambition. Richard craved that moment of dawning fear in Sterling's eyes. It was a hunger that had gnawed at him for a week. When his private secretary announced Sterling's arrival, Richard took a deep breath, settled into his high-backed leather chair, and steepled his fingers, the picture of untouchable authority. Alexander Sterling entered the room alone. There was no entourage of lawyers or aides. He was dressed in a simple, exquisitely tailored dark grey suit, a stark contrast to Richard's power pinstripes. He carried a slim leather portfolio and moved with an unhurried grace that was a quiet statement of confidence in itself. His presence didn't disrupt the power dynamic of the room. It simply ignored it. He was not a supplicant entering a king's court. He was an equal. He walked to the opposite end of the long table and stood for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the panoramic view before turning to Richard. "An impressive view, Richard." Sterling began, his voice calm and resonant, easily filling the cavernous space. The use of his first name was a subtle yet effective parry to the room's intended intimidation. It's easy to feel like a god from up here, but you have to be careful. The heights can make you forget what's happening on the ground. Richard bristled at the veiled condescension. "I'm a busy man, Sterling. I appreciate the architectural commentary, but my time is valuable. I assume you're here about Kinetic Dynamics." "I am," Sterling replied, taking a seat. He didn't wait to be invited. "Your motion to block the acquisition is creative. a lot of impressive legal jargon to say you want to cause trouble. I have a fiduciary duty to my company's shareholders. Richard recited the words, feeling hollow even to him. Your offer for Kinetic, while superficially attractive, undervalues the company's long-term patent portfolio. I believe a more competitive bidding process would yield a higher return for everyone. It's just business. Sterling met his gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Let's not insult each other's intelligence, Richard. This isn't about business, and we both know it. You've held that non-controlling stake in Kinetic for 12 years and haven't attended a single shareholder meeting. Your own analysts recommended divesting it 2 years ago. Your sudden, passionate concern for its patent portfolio appeared exactly 48 hours after you saw me having dinner with Catherine. The directness of the attack was jarring. Richard had expected a dance, a series of feints and parries. Sterling had simply walked to the center of the ring and thrown a haymaker. This has nothing to do with my ex-wife. Richard snapped his voice, a low growl. And I would advise you to leave her out of this conversation. I can't, Sterling said, his voice losing its light edge and taking on the hardness of forged steel, because she is the entire reason for this conversation. You saw her looking happy, looking powerful, and you couldn't stand it. You couldn't attack her directly. That would look petty even for you. So you came after me using your shares in Kinetic as a cudgel. You're willing to sabotage a multi-billion-dollar deal that is crucial for the future of technology, a deal that ironically would significantly increase the value of your own investment, all to soothe your bruised, pathetic ego. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing Richard's carefully constructed armor of self-importance. You are arrogant and presumptuous. Richard spat his face, flushing. You waltz into my city, my world, and you think you understand me. You think you understand the woman I was married to for 25 years. No, Sterling conceded, leaning forward. I don't pretend to understand the man you are. But I have spent the last 8 months getting to know the woman you threw away. I know she is brilliant. I know she is resilient. And I know she is a better strategist than you are. You underestimated her then, and you are making the grave mistake of underestimating her now. You see, you think this is your game, your table. He gestured to the mahogany expanse between them. You're wrong. You've been playing her game from the moment you walked into that restaurant. He reached into his briefcase, retrieved the thin leather portfolio, and slid it with deliberate tool-lowness across the vast, polished surface. It stopped directly in front of Richard. Before you detonate this grenade you've built, I thought you should see the blast radius. I thought you should see the board. With trembling hands, Richard opened the portfolio. The title page read, The Davies Center for Innovation, a proposal for the West Side Yards development. His blood turned to ice. The West Side Yards, the sprawling 16-acre plot of post-industrial wasteland that was to be his magnum opus, his legacy project. He had spent millions on lobbyists, architects, and backroom deals trying to secure it. The bidding process had been secretive, brutal, and he had been confident that his final offer, submitted just last month, was unbeatable. He flipped through the pages, his horror mounting with each one. He saw architectural renderings of a stunning, state-of-the-art campus, a harmonious blend of glass, steel, and green space. He saw a detailed business proposal that was nothing short of visionary. It wasn't just another soulless glass tower of luxury condos. It was a symbiotic ecosystem, a partnership between Catherine's non-profit foundation and a commercial tech incubator. The plan promised thousands of high-paying jobs, educational partnerships with city universities and public community spaces. It was a developer's dream and a politician's fantasy. How he finally whispered, looking up at Sterling, his mind reeling. The bidding was sealed. My offer was immense. Your offer was about money. Sterling explained, his voice patient like a teacher explaining a complex problem to a slow student. Catherine's offer was about value. She knew you wanted that land. She's been listening to you talk about it for a decade. She knew your plan was to build another monument to yourself, another sterile enclave for the global elite. So she spent a year quietly working on a better idea. He detailed the strategy with surgical precision. Catherine had leveraged her foundation's sterling reputation and her own academic contacts. She had personally met with community boards, listening to their concerns. She had courted the city council members Richard had tried to bully. She presented them not with a pile of money, but with a vision for the city's future. A future of innovation, not just empty real estate. The mayor called her proposal the most exciting urban development project of the 21st century. Sterling continued twisting the knife. While you were focused on your hostile takeovers and your trophy girlfriends, Catherine was changing the city. The development rights for the West Side Yards were awarded to the Davies Foundation 2 weeks ago. The announcement is pending. Richard felt the air leave his lungs. He had been so consumed with his petty act of revenge against Sterling that he had missed the main event. He'd been laying a snare for a rabbit, oblivious to the fact that a pack of wolves was surrounding him. "And here's the master stroke, Richard," Sterling said, leaning in for the final fatal blow. "What do you think is the anchor tenant for the commercial wing of the Davies Center, the flagship company that will draw other innovators and validate the entire project?" He paused, letting the silence stretch. "It's kinetic dynamics. Their primary robotics lab will occupy the 3 central buildings. The entire financial model of the Davies Center, Catherine's entire vision, is predicated on my acquisition of kinetic being successful. The deal is symbiotic. The 2 projects are inextricably linked." The trap was sprung. The genius of it was breathtaking in its cruelty. If he pursued his attack on Sterling's acquisition, he wasn't just a bitter corporate raider. He would be the man who personally, publicly, and maliciously destroyed the life's work of his ex-wife, the mother of his children. He would be torpedoing a beloved city project, confirming every caricature of him as a greedy, destructive dinosaur. He would not just lose the deal. He would lose everything: his public standing, what little respect his children had left for him, his entire legacy. He was checkmated, utterly and completely. He stared at the documents, at the elegant building bearing the name Davies, a name she had reclaimed, a name now synonymous with vision and progress. "What do you want?" Richard asked, his voice a dry, rasping sound he barely recognized as his own. The bravado, the anger, the arrogance, it had all evaporated, leaving only the cold, stark reality of his defeat. "It's simple," Sterling said, his voice now devoid of malice, holding only the calm of absolute victory. "You will call your lawyers, and you will withdraw the motion against the kinetic acquisition. Unconditionally. Then you will walk away. The West Side Yards are no longer your concern. The Davies Center is no longer your concern. And Catherine is no longer your concern." Richard sat motionless for what felt like an eternity. The city lights began to glitter in the twilight outside his window, no longer symbols of his kingdom, but tiny, mocking eyes. He thought of Catherine, not the mousy woman he remembered, but the force of nature who had outmaneuvered him at every turn. He had tried to put her in a box, and she had responded by redesigning the entire city skyline. Finally, with a slow, crushing exhalation of breath, he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Fine." The word was the epitaph of his reign. Sterling stood, his objective achieved. He collected his portfolio, his movements crisp and efficient. He walked to the door, but paused with his hand on the handle, turning back to face the broken man at the head of the table. "You know, Richard, in all the time I've known Catherine, I've never once heard her speak ill of you," he said. His voice softened with something that might have been pity. "She talks about your early years, about the ambition she once admired. She says you gave her 2 wonderful children, Elizabeth and William, and that they are the best part of both of you. They, by the way, are both on the junior board of the foundation. They are immensely proud of what their mother is building." He let that final detail land. "She found her own purpose, Richard. I sincerely suggest you try to find one for yourself." The door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous, silent boardroom. Richard remained in his chair, a solitary figure, dwarfed by the symbols of his own hollow empire. The city glittered on, indifferent. He had sought to orchestrate a drama of power and revenge, but had instead been cast as the tragic, obsolete fool in a story of rebirth and triumph. He was Richard Vanderbilt, the man who had everything, and he had never felt so poor. The fallout from that day in the boardroom was not loud, but it was seismic. Richard, humbled and broken, withdrew his opposition to the kinetic dynamics deal. The acquisition went through, and the announcement of the Davies Center for Innovation was met with citywide acclaim. Catherine, no longer a ghost from the past, became a celebrated figure, a philanthropist and visionary in her own right. Richard's name was never publicly connected to the failed land bid. His defeat was a private, deeply personal humiliation. He and Amber parted ways, the illusion of their glamorous life shattered beyond repair. He was left in his penthouse, a king in a kingdom of one, forced to watch the woman he had discarded build a new world without him. He had sought a dramatic confrontation, a way to reclaim his power, but discovered true power isn't about control but creation. Catherine and Alexander didn't just win. They built something better. What happens when a man who has everything realizes he has nothing of value? This story is a glimpse into that brutal awakening. If you were captivated by this tale of love loss and the ultimate revenge of a life well lived, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good story, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. What do you think Richard should do next? Let us know in the comments below.